Welcome into the EMA Online Postgame Podcast. Mason Voth, Alec Bussey from EMA Online here with you as we get ready to recap the Wildcats coming up just short in their comeback attempt against Texas last night. 34-27, the final score. K-State got in a big hole early on. They pressed. The defense was terrible in the first half, and then everything kind of flipped around in the second half. Second half, Texas came back, but they did enough dumb things to make it interesting. They didn't do enough dumb things to give the game away, though. And ultimately, in the end, K-State ends up losing the game by a touchdown. They had the ball in Texas territory in the final 30 seconds of the game, but a fumble that was forced ends up going into the hands of the Longhorns after the first fumble on the drive ended up going out of bounds, fortunately enough, for K-State. There's a lot to talk about in this game. There is Big 12 title implications. There's a quarterback controversy. There is bad defense. There's also game management, which everybody loves to criticize in football especially. But I actually give people credit for this now. Like the way that like Madden and other football video games have been played for so many years now, like most people understand to like a rudimentary level game management skills. And I think last night there are some questions about how the game was managed by Chris Kleiman and K-State at different times. And we'll dive into all of that and everything that is important from it. Alec, I'll let you just start with some opening thoughts before we dive into the hows and whys of last night's game.
Yeah, so obviously K-State falls by a touchdown. I think that a lot of people are going to circle the two turnovers by Adrian Martinez, specifically the interception right before halftime, and then the fumble on the last drive is kind of the quote-unquote reason that K-State lost last night to Texas. But in my opinion, the reason they lost is because they fell behind 31-10 at halftime. And of course, Martinez's interception right before the half kind of contributes to that, considering it was in K-State territory. But give credit to Texas. Bijan Robinson has a hell of a game, rushes 30 times for 209 yards. Has a touchdown on the opening drive that was like 36 yards or whatever it was, and has another run that was 68 yards on the sideline that Texas wasn't able to punch in. But I was really impressed with what Bijan was able to do. That was the first time I've obviously been able to see him in person, and he was incredible. Like, he's everything that I was told he was, and probably a little bit more, Mason, to be honest with you. He's got so much speed and power, and he's agile, and he was incredible to watch. I thought Quinn Ewers had an interesting game. Finishes 18 of 31 for 197 yards, 2 touchdowns. Obviously, if you're a Texas fan, you want to see that completion percentage increased a little bit, but I think he struggled at times, especially throwing the ball downfield. I feel like he didn't hit on any deep shots last night, despite Texas throwing a few of them, but he made a lot of clutch throws in big moments. Obviously, the 2 touchdown passes to Xavier Worthy ended up kind of being a difference in the game. And honestly, I think someone that isn't being talked about very much for the way they played is Jatavian Sanders for Texas. He has 5 catches for 54 yards. A lot of that came in the first half, but just kind of like big completions that I thought he had 21 yards after the catch, which was massive for the Texas offense. But from the K-State standpoint, I mean, Deuce had a pretty good game. I know a lot of people are kind of looking at his rushing yard total and that not eclipsing 100 yards again this season in another game, but he was big in the receiving game. He had 7 receptions for 86 yards, and he had 1 that goes for 28 yards and a touchdown. 44 of those yards coming after the catch. That's pretty incredible. They haven't used him as much in the passing game, as much as Chris Kleiman after the game was like, no, we use him in the pass game. I was like, Coach, you haven't really used him that much in the game.
To be fair, the last 2 years they used him very heavily there. This year he has not been used in it a whole lot, and I thought that they used him pretty well last night. Actually, one of the plays that I liked was similar to something Texas ran with success earlier in the game. Was the throwback that they had to Deuce at one point. The only problem was they wasted it on like 3rd and 25 or whatever it was. So they picked up a good chunk of yardage, but they were in their own territory and they had a punt still afterwards. And I get like you're trying to use that to maybe surprise them and Deuce is shifting enough to get through. But that's something that I would have liked to have seen, whether it was last night against Texas or at some other point in the season when you needed something in a better situation with down and yardage to go.
Yeah, and really, Mason, I think one of the biggest differences in last night's game is that Texas was able to go 5 of 5 inside the red zone. K-State goes just 3 of 4. Being able to capitalize like that for Texas, I think, was massive. And I think we can, and I think this may serve as a good transition. I think Kansas State having to settle for the field goal on that second to last drive instead of getting it into the end zone is kind of where I realized it was going to be really difficult for K-State to win as they were trying to make that comeback. Because when you get the touchdown first, it just feels like the game is kind of like all the pressure was already on Texas, right? Like they were kind of rewatching the same movie that they've seen 2 or 3 times already this season, specifically in their 2 losses against Big 12 opponents. Have a lead, have a multiple score lead, and it just slowly gets trickled and trickled and trickled away. And it looks like they're going to lose it again. I said you in the press box or after the game, like, imagine being a fan of this Texas team. It'd be brutal. Like, it's got to be terrible for those people's hearts. So
I feel so bad for them. Yeah, all their money and whatever else, and their
no, but
pompous jackassery.
I think having to settle for a field goal on that second to last drive, obviously at some point you're going to need 10 points or more if you're able to get 2 touchdowns to win the game. But I think having to settle for a field goal on that last drive put a lot of pressure on the offense to kind of come out and make plays where they got the ball back with about, was it like 2.5 minutes?
Yeah, 2.5 minutes, 2 timeouts.
So it put a lot of pressure on them to kind of move the ball downfield and maybe scramble around a little bit. And they haven't really been in that position at all this season. And I think when you're not put in a position where you have to run a lot of 2-minute offense, obviously they did against Tulane, but that was a long time ago. And think about how much the offense has changed just in its scheme and the things they try and do since the Tulane game. So I think that put a lot of pressure on Colin Klein, Adrian Martinez, and his pass catchers, which at that point in the game didn't include Malik Knowles or Cade Warner to make plays in the passing game when there's not a lot of experience there.
So how this is kind of funky to look at. That drive that ended in a field goal, getting late into the game, that was K-State's second longest drive of the night at 6 minutes, 3 seconds. The only drive that was longer was 6:33 on the second drive of the game, which also ended in a field goal. Outside of those two, though, they didn't have another drive that lasted more than 3.5 minutes. The first touchdown drive was 3:42. But that's the longest outside of those 2 field goals that result with, 6-minute drives. And that's tough. And that's where, if you kind of get into it and look at game management and play calling and some of that stuff, like that's where it was a little questionable that maybe some more shots should have been taken. And I get that you're in field goal range. And so you're just trying to make sure you don't make any mistakes. And also like paying attention to the clock. Like it seemed like so many times there, they were letting the clock just keep going. And it's like, hey, even though there's still 4.5 minutes or whatever on the clock, it's still an issue because you want to have as much as you possibly can. So they ended up using a timeout before one of those plays. Another thing that we can get into is not using the timeout prior to the play that Martinez fumbles on and ultimately ends the game, basically. That was one of those where the clock was ticking down. Chris Kleiman said afterwards that was a situation where they wanted to try and get one more play off. But I don't know, you're down to 30 seconds at that point. I would have just called it. It's a good point to reset for everybody. You still have one timeout left. Like you can really kind of regather and make a decision there. They decided not to do that. So some of that stuff was a little bit odd. Chris Kleiman also said after the game that some of the play calls maybe should have and could have come in a little bit quicker than what they did last night. So that's all stuff that I think can be thrown into question with should they have used the timeout there late in the game. I believe they should have. It didn't seem like they managed the clock well, which I will give this. It doesn't seem like in the 4 years of Chris Kleiman that worrying about the clock going down, whether it's play or game clock, has been as big of an issue as it was in Snyder 2.0. But last night, it was a little infuriating. The other thing from a game management standpoint that sticks out to me, this is a little thing. It probably wouldn't have made a huge difference. But they were taking the kick out all night yesterday, except for when there were 13 seconds left in the first half, and you knew that they were going to come out and just take a knee. That was the kick that they decided not to return. That made zero sense to me.
Mason,
why that would be the decision. Yeah.
And I think you're a good person to ask for this because you've obviously been around the program and watched a ton of K-State, and this isn't something that I'm the most knowledgeable about at this point. And I understand K-State has a long history of having really good special teams play since Coach Snyder kind of came around in his first tenure, and I imagine it really carried over into his second tenure as well. Think about how rare it is to see a team return a kickoff in college football these days. And then think about how often Kansas State tries to do it.
Yeah.
Is that at
Well,
all interesting to you? Like I mean, looking at Kansas State's drives last night, they all kind of started like, and I get Malik Knowles is trying to make a play, and I understand that this is kind of like the scheme that Kansas State kind of runs and everything, but how many of those drives that he started with a kick return got to the 25?
I think so I can tell you this. Only one of them, or let's see, only one of them with a return did. That was the first one of the game that he took to the 35-yard line.
Yeah.
Outside of that, K-State started drives at the 12, the 15,
15,
the
the
20,
10.
and the 15 when it comes to like kickoffs that were taken back. The problem that I think K-State has right now is they have a guy that they know can return kicks in Malik Knowles, and you want to use that to try and change the game and jumpstart something. I don't think that they have the return unit in front of him to help do it this year. Like that has become
and I also
clear.
think the game in general, in the rules of college football, don't promote you
Well,
to try
I
and
get
return the
that.
kick
Honestly,
because
though,
of
like
where the kickoff comes from, and the
I think
rules
with
where you
K-State,
can catch,
you can throw that out. Like it's not for K-State that hasn't been a problem because even in the first 3 years of climbing, they've still had a ton of success in returning kicks.
Okay.
Whether it was Knowles or Josh Youngblood or whoever, I
That's a
really just
great
think
name.
it was until he bailed on the team in the middle of 2020. But he was awesome as a freshman
That's an
returning
awesome
kicks.
name.
Yeah. I really just think it has to do like for whatever reason, like they aren't blocking well enough on returns this year on kicks. Like I think that's the problem. And also like you kind of look at it like Phillip Brooks is a great punt returner, and he hasn't gotten a ton of opportunities this year. I mean, like he took the one back against Missouri. He has one other punt return for a touchdown this year, doesn't he? I think.
I don't think so.
I can't remember if they've got one or two, but like he's not even like attempting to return punts anymore at this point. Some of it he's not even like catching the ball on, which has hurt them at times too with starting field position. So I just think for whatever reason they don't have the dudes this year. And I think it kind of goes down to like one of those things where it was Chris Kleiman mentioned that Jack Bloomer, who's their backup punter, is having to help in punt coverage in certain situations. And that by no means is a knock on Jack Bloomer, but how many other teams in the country have their backup punter on punt coverage? Like, and he's not punting.
I would set the over-under on that at 0.5.
Yeah. So I really think that's part of the issue. And I don't know what it is. That's probably something that Tuesday would be worth an ask of Chris Kleiman to ask him what the difference is as to why they haven't returned a kick yet this year, because every other year that he's been here, they've had success with it. So I think it's one of those things that probably needs to be looked into. And I don't know what the goal is, but special teams is hurting them right now. And they haven't been as good in covering special teams this year. That was, one of the things when talking to one of the guys from Orange Bloods, the Texas Rivals site this week, he was asking me about K-State special teams. And I was like, statistically, it may still not show up like as being bad, but relative to K-State, special teams has been bad this year. And K-State has lost special teams in a lot of situations. And that's something that's really a killer, especially when you consider starting field position in a lot of these where it gets tough early. You feel like you're pressing a little bit more, and they're having to find ways to kind of dig out of some of these holes. So honestly, it's probably best for them right now, unless the situation dictates it, to probably let the ball fly into the back of the end zone and start at the 25 and go with that, because last night you only had you only had one kickoff that started beyond the 25-yard line, and that was the first one of the game.
And maybe we should give credit to Texas for defending it in an effective manner and making plays on the kick returners. But I don't know. I just think that the way college football is kind of ruled now by the actual rules of the sport, like it doesn't promote you to try and return kicks. And I feel like so many coaches in the sport nowadays are like, all right, we'll compromise and we'll take it at the 25. Because I think most defensive coaches would be like, like that's pretty good for us. And I think a lot of offensive coaches would look at it and be like, all right, like we'll take that. Like we'd like it to be better, but we'll take it starting at the 25.
I get it. I just think K-State has been not as good in it this year, and I don't know the circumstances as to why that is. If it's just not having the dudes to do it or whatever, but they should probably stop because it's clearly hurting them right now. And honestly, if you think about it, like, and I get that you can't do this directly with apples to apples and everything, but think about a drive that you try taking the kick out and you start at the 12-yard line and you have to settle for a field goal. K-State racked up 84 yards on 16 plays in the second drive of the game that they had, and they had to kick a field goal. I mean, it'd be another interesting thing to go around and look at how many 84-yard drives end in field goals in college football, because it doesn't seem like very many of them should. So I just think it's one of those little things to kind of keep an eye on and see where things go from here. Very similar to and now penalties kind of mess around with some of this, but K-State put up 65 yards on this next to last drive of the game, and they I don't know, just kind of weird that like they're moving the ball well now. They're starting to get explosive plays in the passing game, which is something that they had not had most of the season. Like I think if you would have gone and looked after the Iowa State game, K-State was dead last in explosive plays in the passing game in the country.
Yeah, and they had 8 yesterday.
Now they've moved up to like better than like middle of the pack. So they're starting to throw the ball. And that's why, like, with Martinez coming back, he had not had like maybe the plays, and he certainly didn't have the receiver production that Will Howard had the 2 games. Last night we saw that like Adrian Martinez got a pretty good dose of receivers helping him out, and he was able to do, just as good as Will Howard would have. I mean, Martinez was 24-36, 329 yards and 2 touchdowns, the 1 pick. But his passer rating was 156.2 last night. Complete 67% of his passes, like easily his best passing game at K-State. And I was impressed with the way he threw the ball. Some of the throws he made were incredible. So I don't know. I just think that they've got some things to figure out, and it's these little things that have to be tweaked right now. And that's one of those spots where, like, I think Chris Kleiman is a pretty in-tune guy, and he's aware of this, but also like how much of this slips through the cracks because you could get away with a couple of those things, like at North Dakota State. And we've seen now little things have made the difference in his time at K-State, where whether it was getting over the hump against some of the better teams in the league, which he hadn't been able to do. Like he hadn't beaten Oklahoma State until this year. He still hasn't beaten Texas since he's been at K-State. He hasn't beaten Baylor since he's been at K-State. Like little things have popped up to maybe, cause them struggles against those teams. And they're going to have to kind of learn what ailments they might be having there and what the fix is. So in the kicking game, is that, as tempting as it is with a guy as talented as Malik Knowles, is that letting the ball fly through the back of the end zone? Possibly. And then finding some of the other ways to kind of get things done. But that's a lot of information and a lot of different things to hit on there, and I'm aware of that. But it's just kind of where the thoughts led me after looking at some of those numbers from last night.
Sorry. Yeah, I'll pivot that to just let's dive into the quarterback situation. So if you're evaluating the way Adrian Martinez played last night, I think you have to say it was a pretty solid game overall. Like, I don't think – because you have to include the 2 turnovers, and they were obviously pretty costly. Now, I will say on the fumble on the last drive, even if he does – the first one, he was lucky that it wasn't recovered by Texas to begin with. He was lucky that ball bounced out of bounds before the 2 Texas defenders were able to get it into their grasp. The second one went right to Texas, and to be honest with you, it probably kind of served as like...
It was, the karma. in that
Yeah,
situation.
I was trying to find the good word for it. It's kind of like good karma because Texas had a lot of things kind of not go their way in the second half, or they had done a lot of stupid things in the second half that Texas has routinely done in the second half that have cost them games, especially under Sark. But that one kind of bounced their way, and it kind of made sense that it did, like you said, good karma. So that needs to be evaluated, and so does the interception. But in the big picture of things, Mason, he's lost only 2 fumbles this season, and one of them was when he got absolutely smoked in that early season game. Was that against South Dakota? Or Tulane? I think it was Tulane.
It was Tulane. It was Tulane, yeah.
Yeah, he got absolutely smoked in the blind side, and ball pops loose. Like, that ain't on him. Like, if you get hit that hard, I don't really expect anyone to hold on to the ball. So that one's not on him. He's essentially had 3 turnovers this season. Like, I don't think that, considering his past and considering his history, and that does need to be considered with him. And I do feel bad for him, the person, from the pure standpoint of these old demons have to be like coming. Like, I gotta imagine he went home last night and he's like, I can't believe I did this again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he has to, like, I have to imagine like he had nightmares last night of things that happened at Nebraska and all of those things kind of coming back to life and whatever. But I thought he played pretty well. The kid completed 24 of 36 passes for over 325 yards.
Yeah.
And he had 2 touchdowns. And
well,
I don't think that he's going to be benched. Like, I think unless he continues to turn it over like he did, I think he probably played well enough to show why he was a starting quarterback for much of the season, and to also kind of show that he's probably keeping the job moving forward.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So for Adrian Martinez, that was the 3rd highest yardage total he's had throwing the football in his career. The only 2 other games that have surpassed 329 yards for him would have been his freshman year at Nebraska. He threw for 384 at Wisconsin. That was a 17-point Nebraska loss. And then let's see, his final game at Nebraska, he threw for 351 yards, also at Wisconsin. That game, he threw 2 interceptions, though, and ended up losing the game by 7. Here's what's interesting about this. How many times you see a quarterback throw 2 interceptions and still get a QBR of 90.6 from ESPN? Like, that's one of those numbers that you kind of look at and you just, like, all the hate that he gets from Nebraska fans, you shake your head at and, like, dude was doing as much as he could. Like, you were putting him in bad situations. And that's the thing last night, where if you go and watch that last fumble, like, I'm not going to put that on him because it looked like he had time. What kills him is that Hadley Panzer lets his man get inside and easily get his hand up near Martinez. Everybody else had protection and was doing a good job last night. Because I'm always interested in this because K-State's offensive line has struggled at times this year in pass protection. That's one of the things that we talked about against TCU was their second best pass blocking game of the season outside of the Tulane game, coincidentally enough. They played well there. And that was one of those things where I was like, okay, I want to go see this. So last night, they grayed out pretty well as a team against the pass block. But, and all 4 of the 5 offensive linemen graded at 65 or better. Cooper Beebe was phenomenal again, 89.1. Like, he's without a doubt one of the best offensive linemen in college football. But Hadley Panzer, who played all 74 snaps, he was 42.7 in pass blocking last night. It's not a very good number. And like that fumble, that's on the offensive line. Like, I get it. Martinez did what he has to as a quarterback afterwards and tried saying, hey, look, like, I was going through my progressions. I got all the way down, to the last one on the play before that got tipped at the line or whatever when he was trying to go for the dump off, and then talking about just trying to make plays. I get it. You got to say stuff like that. That was on Hadley Panzer getting beat again. And that's something that, I think K-State's going to have to kind of evaluate and look at is determine that if you can get some of these guys, maybe more breaks out there. I mean, all 5 offensive linemen played every single snap again last night. That's kind of been the common theme over the last 4 games, basically, 4 or 5 games ever since Andrew Langgang was out for a couple of games. I'm not going to fault him too hard on that one. The interception before the half, it sucks. It stings. Picks happen, though. Like, the dude felt like his team was in a giant hole. It was like he was playing at Nebraska again. K-State's defense was getting smoked. He was trying to make something happen. He made a mistake. It was his first real mistake of the season. I'm not going to crush him too hard for it. It's just one of those that, like, in hindsight is a heartbreaker. And you're like, gosh, really? Like, it couldn't have come at a more inconsequential time. But, like, I don't think it should be harped on too much. And I honestly, like, I'm sick of seeing all the takes that, like, Will Howard should have been the guy last night. I would have been okay with starting Will Howard. If I was in control, maybe I would have started Will Howard. I think I would have. I think I would have said I'm going to ride the hot hand and see what happens. But after last night, that loss is not on Adrian Martinez. And honestly, if you wanted to
give up 34 points, the loss is never on your starting quarterback.
If you had Will Howard out there with the way some of that stuff went down last night, like, I know that, that PFF graded the offensive line out pretty solid, but there were a couple of times where it broke down in a big way. And the only guy that saved that thing was Adrian Martinez by sneaking out of there and somehow making a play. And Will Howard, like, the dude occasionally can move, but a lot of it's on design runs and it has to be wide open for him. Will Howard gets sacked a handful of times last night when Adrian Martinez was able to turn plays that should have been sacks into first downs and keeping drives alive and keeping hope going through Bill Snyder Family Stadium. So it's not wrong if you say that Will Howard should have started last night, but it's wrong of you to suggest that Adrian Martinez is the reason why K-State lost the game last night. Like, yes, he had the fumble that ultimately took the last possession away from K-State. I get that. But if you're going to blame Martinez for that, you also probably need to blame Hadley Panzer for that. You also probably need to go through and blame the defense for getting obliterated in the first half, looking clueless in certain situations, and all this other stuff. And I'm not trying to be harsh. Obviously, that's not the goal here, but I'm just trying to deflect some of this away from Adrian Martinez because I think it's just horribly unfair the way some people treated him last night. And it goes back to what I said on Thursday or whatever day it was, when no matter what decision Chris Kleiman makes, it's going to be the wrong one if they lose. And they lost, and it was Adrian Martinez. And so there are a ton of people that are wanting to say that he made the wrong decision. I don't think he did. And honestly, the way Adrian Martinez played last night gives me more faith in him than what I had going into it, because he threw the ball like I hadn't seen him throw it at K-State. He made plays. He looks healthy for the most part. And now I believe that he can lead him to a 3-0 finish if he needs to. There's a lot of other things that have to go into it, though. And he's going to have to not throw dumb interceptions. He threw one of them last night. That's fine. It happens. The guy that everybody's calling for, I think people have this, short-term memory all of a sudden. Will Howard had his share of dumb turnovers. And again, I'm not trying to go after Will Howard. I'm just trying to make the point here that if you're going to call one guy out, just keep in mind what other things look like. And that's something that I don't think enough people did last night. So I hope everybody kind of cools off on that, reassesses it, and is ready to watch Adrian Martinez lead the Cats to a victory in Waco on Saturday. So those are my thoughts on the quarterback controversy. There shouldn't be one. It shouldn't be what you're talking about from last night's game. It can be brought up, and you can say, hey, I would have started Will Howard. Yeah, I probably would have too. Like, he has 2 games left to burn until he gets to the red shirt being used. I would have thrown him out there because he's got the hot hand. But after last night's performance, I'm not going to say that not starting Will Howard is what lost him the game.
So a couple thoughts here. One, I'm going to quote Sark and actually Brett Bielema. Obviously, I covered Coach Bielema in my time in Illinois.
Just titans of the industry.
And I'm going to quote Sark. I try my best to watch the media availabilities of the opposing team that K-State is playing that week, just so I can kind of get a grasp of what the opposing team coach is saying. And on Monday or Tuesday, when Sark was speaking with the media, he was asked a question about Quinn Ewers and the way he played at Oklahoma State. And essentially his response was, yeah, Quinn didn't play very well, but Quinn isn't the reason that we lost to Oklahoma State. Quarterbacks get too much blame when things don't go the team's way, and they get too much praise when they go the team's way. And Coach Bielema said the same thing in my year and a half of covering the Fighting Illini, is that when things go well, everyone is riding with the quarterback, and when the team wins, the quarterback is playing awesome. And when they lose, it's the quarterback's fault. And that's just the nature of the position that you play. It's something I think you kind of sign up for. If that's fair or unfair, okay? Like there are certain positions that kind of work that way. The starting pitcher in baseball works that way. I think the starting point guard in basketball kind of works that way, right? And in football, it's the quarterback. And I agree with what you said from the standpoint that the reason Kansas State lost last night is not because of Adrian Martinez specifically. Rarely, if ever, is a loss or a win squarely on the shoulders of one player, particularly in football. Like there's a saying that football is the ultimate team game, and not to be cliche, but it's probably true. Okay. And yes, did Adrian Martinez contribute to them losing last night? Yeah, absolutely. 100% he did. I don't think anyone would tell you that he didn't. But did Adrian Martinez contribute to them winning last night just as much, arguably more? Yeah, he did 100% because he threw for nearly 330 yards and he had 2 key touchdown passes. Not to mention he also scrambled and ran for about 52 yards. So Adrian Martinez played well last night. Did he also make some bad decisions and bad plays? Yeah, absolutely he did. And to continue it with the debate between Will Howard and who you would have started last night, I would have started Adrian Martinez last night against Texas. And I think, one, that makes me feel smart because Chris Kleiman did that. And, you know, he knows a lot more about football than I do. So sweet. Happy.
We're gonna send this to him just so he knows he and Alec are buds. That Alec was like, he's a smart man. He's a smart man.
Maybe I need to give myself a little bit of a pat on the back for my football IQ. No, I'm just kidding. But from the pure standpoint of they didn't pull Adrian last night, and I don't think they ever got close to considering to pulling Adrian last night. When you look at the flow of the game for Kansas State, there was a time coming out of halftime where someone asked me, do you put Will Howard in on this first drive? I said, I don't think I would, but if you don't score on your first or second drive and you went to Howard, I wouldn't blame you for doing it. And ironically, K-State scored on their second drive. They got a touchdown on a 4-play, 24-yard drive. So, and I think it needs to be considered in this debate is that Kansas State clearly really wants to redshirt Will Howard this season, if at all possible. And maybe that is what is influencing the decision. But I found it striking in the post-game media availability when Kleiman was asked when they made the decision to start Adrian and what kind of led to that. And he said, we made the decision on Friday, him and Colin Klein did, to start Adrian Martinez based off of the things that they saw in Thursday's practice on film that they thought Adrian would give them a better chance to win the football game. I never got the impression in his response when talking about the quarterbacks last night that he wanted to put Will Howard in the game. I never got that impression once. To me, it's one of those things, and maybe he's being loyal to a fault. I don't know. But I never got the impression that he wanted to put Will Howard in the game last night. And maybe that's because Adrian's his guy. Maybe he's being too loyal to Adrian. Or maybe it's strictly because he thinks and he knows that Adrian Martinez gives Kansas State a better opportunity to win the game.
Well, think about what we talked about last night. Well, a couple things. So number one, I agree. Maybe if they come out and they don't start to do anything in the second half, maybe you make a move just to kind of hope. But at one point in that game, we talked about it, or maybe it was beforehand, whatever. But like Adrian Martinez, if he is throwing the ball like he did last night, he has the highest ceiling of any quarterback on this team, and he gives you the best chance to win because he can run and he can do all those things that we kind of saw him do last night. So that's why I think you keep going with him. Like, he's the best quarterback on this team still. That's, whatever. And to the loyalty thing, I think he's probably pretty loyal to Adrian Martinez. But I also think he's probably pretty loyal to Will Howard. Like we saw how he talked about Will after the win last week, and he understands that he's been through a ton of crap at K-State. And we talked about it last night, or last week. I am included in that. Like I contributed to the problem of Will Howard because he was not very good his first 2 years at K-State. And again, to kind of what Sark said after Quinn's game against Oklahoma State, quarterbacks get too much heat when they lose and too much credit when they win. And honestly, that's exactly what the Will Howard experience has been. When K-State killed Oklahoma State 48 to nothing.
Incredible against Oklahoma State.
Yeah, he did. It was Will. Everybody else played really well in that game too. And think back to, they lose in 2020 to Oklahoma State. Who's the blame on? Will. They lose to Texas last year. Well, part of it was Will, part of it was Courtney Messingham. And like we know Chris Kleiman is a loyal guy. I said it before the game. You, me, and a couple of other guys were talking down there beforehand. And, the loyalty got brought up. It's like we know how loyal Chris Kleiman is and like how much he cares for his dudes. Like this is the guy that we've seen get down on a knee and cry on the field with his quarterback, with Skylar Thompson. Like he cares about these dudes. He wants what's best for him, but he also wants what's best for the team. And last night, I think, was the best of both worlds for him. Like he was able to put his faith back into Adrian Martinez, and it was also what was best for K-State. Unfortunately, the defense struggled early on, and ultimately, one of those mistakes that happens as a quarterback happened. Adrian Martinez has thrown one interception this year, and unfortunately, it happened before the half in a game that was trending towards a blowout. And K-State was able to make it closer. So you go through and you reevaluate everything that went on there. But I think it is proven now that Chris Kleiman, I know a lot of people still aren't going to believe this and they're not going to like it. Chris Kleiman made the right call last night. I think Adrian Martinez was the way to go. He's the way to go to finish out the season because he does give you a very high ceiling. And I tell you what, it's a beautiful thing that if things do go south, you now at least have the confidence that you might have a plan B in Will Howard that can help you out. And the other thing that benefits that is that you only have 3 regular season games left, and Will Howard has 2 games left that he can play in this season. So there's a lot of things that can still happen this year. And I think a lot of the quarterback conversation, if it's going in a negative way or the wrong decision was made, I think that's silly. I think you can have the opinion that I would have started Will Howard, but I don't think you can say that it was wrong that Chris Kleiman didn't start Will Howard. I think both of those things can be the case. Like you look around, for like you're deciding what you want to have for lunch, and you got all these options in front of you, and it's like, I don't know, like I kind of want a sandwich, but I don't know, I could also, go and have like some soup or something. Either way, it's going to get the job done. You're going to have lunch, but it's just about how you get to that point. And it just because you end up deciding to have soup doesn't mean that you should have gone with the sandwich. And that's kind of a crappy, stupid Colin Cowherd analogy there, but I'm just kind of laying it out on how all of this works out. So it is what it is. They'll move on and they'll learn from it. And we can talk about the defense last night because there's a lot to talk about with K-State's defense, including the first half not being very good and also losing Julius Brents 4 plays into the game.
Yeah, so obviously giving up 31 points in the first half, I think has a lot to do with the way Kansas State lost. I said that earlier in the show, and I still believe that sentiment. I don't feel like anyone on the defense particularly had an overly good game. Like Kobe Savage had 8 tackles, 5 tackles, or by himself. Obviously, he has a big solo tackle on the pitch play to Bijan to kind of get the ball back to Kansas State with about 2.5 minutes left. He played well. I thought Eli Huggins did a semi-decent job during the game, but Bijan still ran for 209 yards. So how good of a game did Eli Huggins really have? I didn't think Felix Uzama had his best game. He didn't have a single hurry on the backfield. He didn't have a sack. I think secondary, I thought kind of.
I think part of that might be on other guys than Felix. Felix was getting multiple guys thrown at him all night long. They made sure to not let Felix beat them.
That's fair.
And so I think part of that is on Joe Klanderman and Chris Kleiman needing to find a way to have other guys get home. And we saw, honestly, it was a little bit better in the second half. Like we saw Brendan Mott get in there and put a pretty good shot on Quinn Ewers at one point. Like I think it got better. If you look at it, Felix still graded out pretty highly. 74.4 was his grade last night from PFF. And Eli Huggins was actually the highest graded defensive player at 83.4. So a lot of that comes down to, I just think, maybe some of the other things that happened. Guys that maybe don't go as good, like the linebackers weren't graded out too highly last night. And that's honestly probably where you get more of the Bijan thing too. But I just think it was tough. Like Texas, when they are motivated and focused, they have all the talent in the world. They're probably the most talented team in this conference. They can do what they did in the first half. The problem is I don't think have the guys personality and mentally that can stay locked in for 60 minutes. And sometimes they just flat don't show up. And that's how they lose games to Texas Tech. But it's also how they blow out Oklahoma 49-0 and how they get a 31-10 lead at K-State at halftime. So it's just one of those weird things.
Yeah, I don't think the secondary had its best game. No. Even though Texas didn't hit on a lot of those throws deep downfield, I thought that those receivers were open, and if Quinn had made a better throw here or a better throw there or more on target pass on a few of them, that the game probably could have swung a little bit more in Texas's favor, especially in the first half and a few times in the second half. He missed on those. But obviously, Ekaboito has the key forced fumble on Roschon Johnson's fourth down run that got inside the 25, 30-yard line, whatever it was. And then I also thought that Josh Hayes was huge on his forced fumble of Roschon in the second half on that crossing pattern that would have gone for a first down. So those were big plays in the game, but I didn't think that the secondary overall played very well. And I don't want to get too into the weeds on the Julius Brents targeting because, one, I think you and I have different opinions on it. And while it did have an impact on the game, I don't think it had a massive impact on the outcome of the game. But I do think that was targeting.
I think
it's one of those situations where, and I'll add this before I let you go. Mm-hmm. It's one of those situations where the way the game is officiated today, it caters to the offense. And while Julius Brents isn't in a situation where he can't change his direction, he can't change the way he's coming in on that. He can't change physics, right? He can't do those things. He can't change timing. It's one of those situations where the game is just catered to the offense today and player safety. So defensive players don't light up offensive players like he did on that play. And while some are arguing that he led with his shoulder, while some are arguing that he may have led with his head, I thought his head made the crown of his helmet made close to direct contact with the receiver's head. And when the receiver is one, defenseless, and two, it's head to head or shoulder to shoulder or shoulder to head contact, that's going to be called targeting, especially over the middle of the field. And as unfortunate as that was for Kansas State, I thought it was the right call.
Yeah. So here's first, I'll talk about the secondary first. They were not good last night. It was not good at all. It was, it never felt like they stopped somebody with their coverage. It either felt like Texas caught the ball for a big play, whether it was a touchdown or big yardage, or the ball was overthrown by Quinn Ewers. Those were the three outcomes last night. It was either big play, touchdown, overthrow. It never felt like we had similar, Ekaboito was really good against Oklahoma State and against a quarterback in Spencer Sanders that's talented. And it felt like the DBs were the ones making the stops, making the plays there. Didn't get that feel last night, and that's what contributed to some of it early on. Now, Ekaboito and Josh Hayes do deserve a ton of credit for the fumbles that they forced, especially Ekaboito. Like, if K-State had won that game last night, that's one of those plays that gets remembered in an even greater magnitude than what it will, because like that was pretty spectacular the way that played out, and he deserves all the credit in the world for that. But they weren't very good last night, and this is how I think Julius Brents impacts that. Is think of how many times we saw, especially in that first half, those defensive backs looked like they were kind of swatting away at each other, They looked like that they were kind of confused with what was going on, and pointing fingers at, hey, it was on you, it was on you. I think that's one of those things where if you have Julius Brents out there, you have another guy that is in a position that absolutely feels like he knows what he's doing, and you don't have as much of the confusion that went into it. And like it also just would have helped to have an all conference player out on the field for a majority of the game and more than just 4 plays. Now, for the targeting penalty itself, the intent I don't think was there from Julius Brents. Obviously, it looks like a violent play, as most of these that end up getting flagged do. I think he turns and he's trying to put the shoulder into it and gets his body around whatever. By the rules, maybe it is targeting. The problem is, and this is where officiating comes into play, is it's inconsistently called. Sometimes that is flagged, sometimes it isn't. It isn't. I wouldn't have been surprised last night if the refs popped back on the mic and said that there was no targeting on the play, as much as I wouldn't have been surprised that the outcome was they upheld the targeting call. So I think that's a problem with it. And I also think, and this has been discussed a ton everywhere else, it was a huge topic on the radio show that I did in Wichita for 2 years. My co-host and I, we always talked about how like the targeting situation needs to get figured out. Basketball has the flagrant 1 and the flagrant 2. The flagrant 1, you're not ejected from the game. And they have all these little parameters in there where it's a judgment call by the refs on if it's a flagrant 1 or a flagrant 2. And that's honestly where targeting needs to go at this point. Like, the game goes in a different route if that's, say it's targeting 1 and targeting 2. If it's targeting 1, it's the 15-yard penalty. It goes down next to that player's name, and if they get another targeting call, doesn't matter what they are, they're out of the game. But they get to stay in because it didn't look like there was intent there. It wasn't Brent's launching or leading with his head. He turned his shoulder, and yes, he got him in a bad spot, defensive receiver, all that stuff. But that's not the kind of play that you should be kicking guys out of games for, especially 4 plays in a game of that magnitude. So that's where I think things have to be changed. The rules are the rules. It's a brutal call to go against K-State and Julius Brents, and I'm sure it's something that they're not going to be happy about for a very long time. It may have been applied in the right way, but again, that just goes to show that there are flaws in the rule book and officiating right now and how all this ultimately plays out. Other thing that I will add on to this with officiating, officials were bad last night. Like, they were not good. Both K-State and Texas got away with pass interference penalties in the first half of the game that I thought were significant. Obviously, the one that hurt K-State was more significant because it was that 4th down play with Phillip Brooks in the end zone. K-State ends up getting 0 points on that drive. Maybe they ultimately get 7 out of that. Instead, there's no call there. There was a face mask that went unnoticed on Deuce Vaughn earlier in the game as well, which also kind of brings things into question. But as I mentioned, like Texas, they had a play where they very much probably should have had pass interference called on K-State. It wasn't. So I don't think it was a banner day for officiating in the Big 12. It highlighted some of the problems that remain in football officiating and where they need to go to change things. But
yeah,
that's all I got on it.
Yeah, I don't want to get too into the officiating details of things just because I'm not a type of person who ever thinks it should have a huge outcome on the game, and I don't think it had a massive impact.
It didn't have an impact on the game. I will say that. Like the Brents thing, maybe, and obviously the pass interference thing, but there were enough other things that went on. I also think K-State got away with holding a handful of times last night. Like, so there were certainly things there that you could look at that the refs just missed, and I think both teams benefited and didn't benefit from the calls / no calls.
Well, here's something that a lot of people missed as we get into Big 12 conversation from the weekend. I think a lot of people missed Kansas going to a bowl game entering the 2022 season.
Why the need to bring that up right now?
Well, because I was getting to a point where we've been going for about 45, 50 minutes, and I was like, all right, we can transition to Big 12 talk.
I was not going to bring up that game. No, we can get that one out of the way. And KU Oklahoma State. Mike Gundy decided that like nepotism wasn't the way to go for this game, and he may have been
Nepotism in
wrong.
college football is
Well,
a real problem.
Garrett Rangel, 27 of 40 for 300 yards, but 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Throws 2 picks on the first 2 drives of the game. Kansas immediately gets the lead by 2 scores, and they never looked back. So the Jayhawks are bowl eligible now. They're 6-3, 3-3 in the Big 12, and they're finishing stretch now. They're at Texas Tech, home against Texas, and then at K-State to finish things
By the
out.
way, your prediction from weeks ago.
Yeah, there you go.
You nailed it.
Yep. It happened in a much different way than I thought it would, but Kansas does indeed beat Oklahoma State at home, even though I said that earlier in the season and I wanted to walk it back, but Alec kept reminding me that I did make that prediction. Oklahoma State, like if they don't have Spencer Sanders, it's evident that they're going to be in a world of hurt right now because they don't have another quarterback on that roster. That's something that I've picked up on my time kind of browsing and perusing O State Illustrated and taking some looks at first off, people were thinking it was going to be Gunnar Gundy, and they were all about like, oh, Gundy did this on purpose so he could have his kid play, blah, blah, blah. And then he doesn't play his kid, and the guy that he plays instead is terrible. So I don't know what to make of that. Jason Bean was phenomenal yesterday, 18 of 23, 203 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. Devin Neal, though, was the real story for Kansas. He runs for over 200 yards and a touchdown. He also has over 100 receiving yards in the game. So Devin Neal has a very good showing there, and Kansas now moves on. That game with Texas Tech will probably be fun next week. That'll probably be one you bet the over on because I don't think either of those defenses are going to play. The biggest game yesterday, or the biggest noon kickoff, was TCU Texas Tech, and Tech flirted for a little bit like they might do something, but ultimately they let TCU pull away with a 10-point win. Here's the thing: if you're K-State, Baylor, or Texas, whichever team gets TCU in Arlington, you're going to feel pretty good about your chances. You're going to say, because if you lose to them in the regular season, which K-State's the only one to have done it so far, TCU still has Baylor and Texas on the schedule. But if you lose to them, you're licking your chops because you think that you can get them back in Arlington. And I think that's the case. Like, K-State has 2 losses in conference play right now. Neither of those losses am I worried about if K-State has to play them again. Like, K-State has proven they are a good enough team, and they can be one of the best teams in this league. They can compete with everybody. Nobody scares me in this conference right now. There are scary games, like road trips to Waco and Morgantown put you a little on edge. They spook you a little bit, but K-State should not be scared of any of these opponents because TCU was pretty pedestrian yesterday outside of Kendre Miller, who we knew about Bijan Robinson and Deuce Vaughn, but Kendre Miller has thrust himself into the top tier of Big 12 running backs.
Yeah, he's very good. And TCU continues to kind of play with their food and mess around for, like, yesterday's game was close. Like, their games for the last month have been pretty close. Obviously, the game against Oklahoma State was close. The game against Kansas State was close, and they had to come back big time. The game at West Virginia a week ago.
Sonny Dykes, cover machine. Vegas loves him.
So, yeah, I mean, TCU very well can end up being undefeated, but the longer they continue to mess around with teams that they are more talented than, they'll probably continue to get away with it. But next week, they're not more talented than Texas. So if they flirt around and mess around with Texas and Texas doesn't do dumb things in the second half, I don't know if they come back and beat Texas.
Yeah. All right. Here's what is being looked at right now for Oklahoma, who loses to Baylor yesterday at the Palace on the Prairie, as their radio guy spits out. This would be Oklahoma has to win out now to go 5-4 in the Big 12. The only other season that would match that in recent years was you go back to 2014, they went 5-4. You have to go back further than that, though. It would be to the great John Blake in his final season at Oklahoma when they went 3-5 in Big 12 play, that Oklahoma was below 500 in conference play, and they had 5 losses in conference play. By the way, do you know who the defensive coordinator on the 1998 Oklahoma Sooners was? He was an NFL head coach for a little bit in the AFC East. He might like feet. Rex Ryan. Rex Ryan was the defensive coordinator of the 1998 Oklahoma Sooners, who went 5-6.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. But that's kind of what Oklahoma is looking at right now. So I got a question for you. Does Oklahoma suck?
I've been telling you for weeks Oklahoma sucks. What do you mean?
I don't think they do. I just think that their defense isn't very good.
I do not. Yeah, they suck. What do you? Yeah.
Also, Dylan Gabriel threw 3 picks yesterday.
They're awful. They're 5-4. They're objectively not good. Okay, this might upset some people. If you go 6-6 and you go to a bowl game, you're not good.
Yeah, I agree.
You're 6-6. You're 500. You're objectively average at best, and I would argue you're below average.
Kansas,
because every team gets 2 or 3 cupcakes in the non-conference. The minimal bar of being 6-6 to go to a bowl game is a joke.
Yeah, I get that.
Oklahoma's objectively not good.
Is Baylor good? That's the question we need to ask because
they're better than Oklahoma.
Well, that's true. Blake Shapen was not special yesterday. They get the job done on the ground again, even though Richard Reese leaves the game after only 4 carries. But Craig Williams comes in, carries it 25 times for 192 yards. So they can run the ball, but their defense gave up 35 points. So I feel better about K-State's chances against Baylor after yesterday's game because it solidified 2 things. Oklahoma is not a good team this year, and Baylor is an all right team that has something to play for still, which can be dangerous. But they're nothing that can't be, stopped and overtaken. So just that was a weird one yesterday in the Big 12 where you look up and you go, okay, Baylor's going to do this thing. Other game, who cares? Iowa State beat West Virginia 31-14. So now the Big 12 has 2 teams at 1-5 and at the bottom of the Big 12. But Iowa State proved that they could finally get something done. JT Daniels, homeboy, you might want to try something other than football. Go pro in something other than sports. 8 of 22, 81 yards, a touchdown and a pick yesterday. And ultimately, he didn't finish the game. Garrett Green came in and played. So there you have it. That's your look around the Big 12. Any thoughts on that great game?
None. Absolutely none. Other than I had a good friend from high school at the game, and he was excited to see. He goes to Missouri State, so he doesn't get an opportunity to see a ton of high-profile college football games. And if that's what you want to call West Virginia, Iowa State, a high-profile game, I got to send him a message today and ask him what he thought. But
technically, it was Power 5 football.
It was. But yeah, ironically, on what was a wild Saturday of college football, I feel like the Big 12 wasn't very wild, which is odd because I think on most Saturdays, the Big 12 is very wild and nuts. Yesterday, it kind of seemed to go the way I kind of would have expected.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see where things go. I would tell you this: that's a good sign for K-State, who has to go to Morgantown in 2 weeks. That West Virginia is in a tough spot. They seem broken. They have Oklahoma this upcoming weekend. We'll see what they look like against them. But K-State's going to be able to bring back their Grim Reaper motif and possibly give the kill shot to Neil Brown's West Virginia career after that game. Although, dude, Neil Brown, maybe he gets the Kiffin treatment and gets left on the tarmac in Norman because
$20 million.
Nobody cares though. Like nobody cares about these buyouts. Like, nobody cares about him because Missouri just gave Drinkwitz a 2-year extension. Like, they're gonna have to buy that. They're gonna have to buy that sucker out real quick.
Now that the extension doesn't matter.
I know that's what I'm saying, but
the extension just is a recruiting pitch, so he can.
I know, but you're talking about like the buyout, but the buyout.
Well, did the buyout change? I haven't had a chance to read a ton about it yet. If the buyout didn't change, the extension doesn't mean anything. Well,
that's true. But my assumption would be like, I don't know, if you're a coach, do Do you sign an extension if there's no extra tie-in attached to that? You gonna let it wear out on you? I guess maybe depending on how things go. I don't know. We'll see.
I'll
But
get on a mini rant here before we get out of here.
okay.
College athletic directors suck. Absolutely suck at negotiating contracts with head football coaches. Awful at it.
Do you
Like, they
think
throw these buyouts out to people who would take the job for free.
Yeah.
Ed
Do you
Orgeron would
think
have
that
coached
we're at a
LSU
point
for
now
free, and then he got
where
paid $17 million to get fired by LSU.
are
Brent
these
Venables
athletic?
has a fully guaranteed contract at Oklahoma.
Yeah, they're bad.
Brent Venables could have been a head coach at how many different schools in the country? And he decided to be the head coach at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
You don't need to give him a fully guaranteed contract.
Athletic directors, have they gotten bad at just like picking coaches now? Because they all have to use these search committees to find their
I'm an
head coach.
anti-search firm.
Yeah, like I mean, did your search firm tell you that the guy who was after the guy who was after the guy at App State was the right pick for Missouri? Like, predictable. But there you go. Those are just odd thoughts to end everything. We are finishing this just afternoon, so the NFL games are kicking off. The Cowboys have a bye this week, so I got nothing to do. Who do the Bears have this week?
They play the Dolphins.
Right now?
Yeah, I think so. But they're
All
not
right.
on TV here, so.
Okay, well, go Skylar Thompson and the Dolphins, and we'll reconvene next week or this coming week to prepare for the game against Baylor. We'll also have a recap in the middle of the week, talk some hoops as well, because the season officially starts tomorrow night at Bramlage Coliseum, 8:00 for K-State and UT-RGV. I said it during our video after the exhibition game. Do you know UT-RGV's mascot?
I do.
Go ahead.
Aren't they the Gauchos? No, they're the Vaqueros.
They're the Vaqueros, yes.
You want to know why I know that?
Because I said it on the video after the game against Washburn.
No, I know that because Illinois played UTRGV last year.
Okay. All right. Do you know who is?
Who would have thought I'd cover two UTRGV games in back-to-back years? Also, covering and writing about UTRGV ain't fun because typing UTRGV or Texas Rio Grande Valley, not fun.
Nah. I mean, yeah, that's a lot of letters there. You know who is the Gauchos?
I do. Some school in California. Is it UCSB?
It is UC Santa Barbara. So I'm a mascot and logo aficionado. So I'm gonna start testing you before each non-con basketball game. If you can tell me who the mascot is without looking.
Okay.
And now it'll be easy for like Friday. I think you know what Cal's mascot is.
Golden Bears.
Yeah. I don't know who comes after that. You obviously know who like Nebraska's mascot is. Some of the other mid-majors are easier to pick up on as well. So actually, you know what? Screw it. I know that you got crap to do, but we're just going to rip through it right now. It's not fun to do it all at one time. Also, by the way, tomorrow is a double header for basketball. So the women tip off at 5:30 with Central Arkansas, and then the men go at 8. So you can spend an entire night in Bramlage if you so choose. All right. You're going to rip through this right now. Do you know what Kansas City's mascot is? Formerly UMKC, now they just go by Kansas City.
Are they the Roos or the Kangaroos?
Yes, they are the Roos. K-State will play in the Cayman Islands Classic against Rhode Island. I think this is one of the easier mid-majors. Fats Russell played there.
They're not the Blue Hens. No, that's Delaware.
That's Delaware.
What is Rhode Island?
They are the Rams.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Okay. You obviously know Tulane. K-State could play Tulane in their second game. Nevada.
Wolfpack.
Okay, there you go. Butler, Butler. That's whatever. Do you know Wichita State's mascot?
Shockers.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Abilene Christian is up on the schedule next, December 6th.
They're some sort of cat, aren't they?
They are some sort of cat.
Are they like a cougar?
They are a wildcat.
Nah. Okay.
So
They're purple,
wildcat.
right? Aren't they purple and gray?
Yeah, they are.
Purple and
Yeah, we're
silver?
gonna have 2 purple wildcats in town for that game. December 11th, Incarnate Word comes to town. So they used to just like be UIW. Now they are just Incarnate Word. So
They're
are you
not
ready
like a
for?
cardinal, are they?
They are a Cardinal. So there you have it. Nebraska, you know them. Then the last non-con game prior to Big 12 SEC Challenge is December 21st against Radford. Do you know Radford's mascot?
The Radford Ramblers?
No. They are the Highlanders.
I definitely would never have gotten that. That's a terrible nickname.
Yeah. So there you go. The Radford Highlanders. Not bad. Not bad at all. I had a buddy in high school. He had like an NCAA tournament shirt from I don't know what year it was, and it had all the logos of all the teams that made it into the tournament that year.
Good shirt.
And so it would just be one of those things where we'd be sitting around and be quizzing me on logos right there, and I'd be blasting them out of the park. My favorite mascot in college basketball, I always would play as them in NCAA basketball 10, is Mississippi Valley State. Do you know Mississippi Valley State's mascot?
No.
It's pretty badass. They are the Delta Devils.
Do you know there's a really funny one in St. Louis, pharmaceutical school, I think?
Well, I don't know some random dopey NAIA pharmaceutical school. What is this?
Yeah, okay. They're the eutectics.
I don't even know what a eutectic is.
I think it has something to do with pharmaceuticals.
Oh, okay.
Because it's obviously
that seems
obviously
silly.
okay. Dictionary. Relating or denoting to a mixture of substances in fixed proportions that melts and solidifies at a single temperature that is lower than the melting point.
What they have athletics there?
Yeah, they do.
What the heck? I mean, so what level do they play in?
I don't know. I just know it's funny.
I do think
their logo is kind of funny.
I think they are NAIA. They are. I just found a story about them playing Friends, which is here in Wichita. So there you have it. I'm not going to be able to help you out with NAIA schools from outside the state of Kansas, but I can certainly nail down any of the Division I schools you throw my way.
I'll give you my favorite one, and then we should get out of here. I really like Michigan State Spartans.
Why? What's so cool about that?
I think it's really cool. I think their logo is really cool. I think their university saying of Spartans will is really cool. I don't know.
I think
the Spartan logo is cool. I think Sparty is a good mascot.
I like their old basketball uniforms, the one that just said state on them, like the Draymond Green era, like state ones. The ones like 09 Final Four. Those were good. I don't particularly care for Tom Izzo or Draymond Green, but I did like their uniforms for a little bit.
Yeah, I just really like, I don't know. I think Spartans is cool.
All right. Well, that's our average end of the podcast derailment, and we'll have more of that later on in the week. Basketball tomorrow night. Alec and I are out for the time being.